So there's something that I've been noticing as I've been playing more and more older games, and I feel like out of all the stuff that I felt with them, from how dated and clunky they feel, I could never explain for the longest time why all of them felt and look so off. As some of you know, I recently replayed San Andreas on the PS2, and I briefly mentioned how off-putting the forests look compared to any other modern games' woods. Like how empty, realistic, but not realistic it looked, and in the comment section, someone had gave me the word that I was looking for, liminal. Now, the topic of liminal spaces in general is so popular. There was an entire period of time where I was getting recommended nothing but these videos showcasing these weird, uncanny images that looked eerily familiar. And this is a topic that could be talked about and debated forever, but I feel like the difference with all of those videos compared to video games, especially older ones, is that it was very unintentional. As in, games back then weren't purposely trying to create these really off-putting images. And it's a combination of not only hardware limitations, but just how retro games were made. Now, I've talked about a lot of great things that hardware limitations of older consoles did for games back then, like forcing devs to use different creative workarounds, but I've never exactly talked about the byproduct of it. Now, there's of course an endless amount of examples that you can bring up, like Vice City's empty beach, Max Payne's weird giant wide open hallways, Spyro, Mario 64, Silent Hill, etc. And the one thing that you notice is that N64 and PS1 games as a whole are peak examples of liminal spaces, which makes sense because after all, this is the mid-90s when video games started shifting to 3D graphics and developers were creating these real-life environments for the first time while staying within the limits. It was like the experimental time period of it, where no one had any real type of blueprint to follow and were just trying stuff, ultimately resulting in these weird, awkward spaces that looked way too big, stretched textures, unnaturally long hallways, everything. You could just tell that it was in its beginning stages, which is why it's a little bit different than, let's say, NES games, because while there is a little bit of loneliness in games like Zelda, 2D graphics and everything about them is completely abstract. It isn't trying to make things look real, and your brain sort of accepts it as, yeah, okay, this is a video game. And I'm not saying that we don't have that same kind of feeling for 3D games, because at the end of the day, games are games. But for these kinds of games that were being tested in this new format at the time, it's a little bit different when they are now trying to convince you that it's real, which is why it has that uncanny valley look. And that got me thinking about not just the technical limits, because while that does play a big role in this, I also feel like just the way games were meant to be played and how they were originally designed also contributes to it. Because think about it, games today are made with the intention to have players stop every 10 seconds to look around at how beautiful it is. I mean, almost every modern game today has a photo mode or a button that lets you admire the entire view, and it's like no matter where you're at, they want you to notice every single detail and reflection they put into their $200 million game. With retro games, if the mission is to, let's say, save the princess, you're going from this starting point to this point. All this other stuff in the middle doesn't matter, which by definition is what liminal spaces are. It's just a transitionary period between 2 points. That hallway staircase doesn't matter. They're just used so you can traverse to that next objective or endpoint. It's just that, unlike how modern games want you to focus on everything at all times, everything about retro games is built off of momentum. There's no like stopping or looking around, because that doesn't benefit you and there's no real reward for doing that. They want you to be laser focused and don't want you to notice any of the low poly textures or weird disproportion size of things. Because when you do hyperfixalize on it and try to make sense of it, you begin to engage with it in a way that it was never designed for. You can like think of these areas as more of like an afterthought. It's not that devs were careless or lazy back then, it's just that the priority was gameplay and how fun it could be. Those areas were just used as support and didn't need to be anything beyond that. I mean, you also have to factor in 3D graphics, especially for the mid-90s, took up way more memory, and in their eyes, it was kind of like, why waste all these resources to fill up a hallway with detail when players are just gonna blaze right past it? In a way, you can kind of think of liminal spaces as like loading screens. Loading screens in general aren't that interesting because they're not made to be stared or admire that. It's just taking you to the next spot they need to get to. I mean, in some cases, the entire game can be a loading screen. Look at True Crime Streets of LA on the PS2. True Crime's open world is a 1-to-1 scale of LA in real life, making it one of the largest PS2 open worlds ever. And with that comes with these long, never-ending roads that look like they go on literally forever, which are accurate in size, but because of the limits of the console, the hardware just cannot support the density that the scale demands. Everything about it looks hollow, and you spend about 95% of the time in these transitional periods, making it feel like the entire map is just one giant in-between space, rather than just certain parts being that. And I know sometimes we tend to think these liminal spaces are scary or unsettling, which they definitely can be, but overall for me, I always look at these as another novelty aspect of older games, because while I know that there are entire games today based around trying to capture this feel, this was just something that was a part of every game back then. It was the normal design choice, and that has always just seemed so cool to me.